My cosmic kinship can get a Guernsey's there somewhere.
Tell you what, we need to write. I'm going to write on there.
What is the correct time according to you?
9:30. Oh, according to me.
Mine says about 1 minute to go. Okay, 9:30. Good morning again, brothers and sisters. We need some sound. Hello? Can you hear? Okay. So good morning once again. I'm going to use sign language. Please, if you have a mobile phone, could you either switch it off or switch it to silent mode for the duration of this session? Thank you. Respected President, panelists, brothers and sisters, we have a question and answer session now. A number of questions have been submitted for the panel to make comments on. My primary role is to facilitate this session. During the next hour, we will proceed through a number of questions and see what the panelists have to say about them. So it will be a journey as we go along. These sessions can be rather interesting actually, because they may bring up aspects of things which have already been said during sessions at conventions, as well as different points of view. And certainly in the Theosophical Society, different points of view are not only respected, but they are extremely important, so that we do not become like sheep, all following each other with some kind of set of stock answers. Also, in a certain sense, answers are perhaps thoughts in this moment about a given subject, and they're not defined for all time. They are and should be part of a continuing exploration. So let us proceed. The first question is, are Theosophists in danger of conforming only to the teaching of theosophical work, and in the process becoming as a religion in the sense of limiting, binding, or exclusive attitudes, as perhaps some religions bind themselves only to the teachings of the Bible and the Quran? They are two examples. So, just to recap slightly, because it's a long question, are Theosophists in danger of conforming only to teachings of theosophical work and becoming as a religion in the sense of limiting, binding, or exclusive attitudes? Is this a danger for Theosophists? Who would like to approach this first?
I'll take that.
Brother Pradeep. By the way, all the panelists have already been introduced in some detail, so I'm not going to introduce them again now. Brother Pradeep Gohil.
The answer is no. I don't believe that Theosophy is in any danger of becoming a religion. Let me start by just saying, ask any religion and they'll be able to define themselves with clarity. And everyone will be saying the same thing. You ask Theosophists what is Theosophy, and you'll find as many answers as there are members here. So that itself is, I think, the big difference. That itself will ensure Theosophy is not going to become a religion. Secondly, religions don't continuously do research. In Theosophy, as per our objective, we continuously do research. We talk about the findings of this research in conventions like this. And it is this that evolve our knowledge about Theosophy. So it is not a fixed book which will talk to you all about Theosophy. And I think it is for these reasons that it cannot become a religion.
I would just say that I agree completely with what Pradeep said. I would just perhaps nuance it slightly. Theosophy, no potential for becoming a religion. Theosophists, for some of us, I think there is absolutely no danger of becoming religiously minded about this theosophy because we've already done it. I don't know if it has ever occurred in any of your meetings. I have been in meetings in the United States with members who are deeply versed in the teachings of Theosophy, to the point that they are exclusive, dogmatic, just eloquently knowledgeable, but treating it as any other religion. So Theosophy is not the problem. I have in the past said that the Theosophical Society is perfect in every way. The only problem we ever have is with Theosophists. And so it's our responsibility to not become conformed. Anything that the necessity of an institution, an organization, is so that we are able to provide in the freest form possible these profound teachings of Theosophy. But the Theosophical Society is an organization. It's an institution. And so if we are not very careful, then we can easily fall prey to the same sorts of things that other organized bodies do. So it's up to us, would be my only nuance to what Pradeep had offered. The research, the openness is the hallmark, but there's a certain responsibility that comes with the choice to explore toward truth.
Thank you. Dorothy?
Yes, thank you, Lynn. I'd just like to add, coming from the sector of education, that is the medium and the message, pardon me, building the bridge between Theosophy and the person who's coming in for a start. Building the bridge. What do you say? And also coming to and having been in a lodge and trying to work out how to do a program every week, what's going to be talked about next Sunday, you sometimes think maybe it's going to church on Sunday, and you have that orientation to how to fill the program. And this is what I was saying, how society can become ossified into particular topics and fragmented topics for members over a year, if you look at a program. So we need to see how we are actually moving through to accommodate different needs and different groups of people within the society. Because I do think there's an evolution. Mind you, I only have my own experience to really talk from, but that is coming in and hearing about what it's about. I didn't hear about it was a way of viewing, a world view. Rather, it was like going back to teaching European history or history of Asia, and even teaching the history of India, and where I taught topics and people were expected to understand them and then have that as their knowledge. Whereas I see Theosophy and the role of the society is to make it a living truth. If we don't preserve that living, I think HPB called it the vitality of living truth, and find ways of working that into our programs, then it will become the habitat of intellectuality. It'll become not a living thing. So that's ahead of us. That's the challenge, I think, for us at this stage in its history, to become a living thing and a way of being rather than knowing about that topic, karma, reincarnation, the masters, the mystics, and trying to put it all together. I think members need help in making it a cohesive thing and seeing it as that. I think that's all I want to add. Yeah.
Thank you. We move on to the next question now, which is, what do you understand the New Age to mean? Capital N, capital A. What do you understand the New Age to mean? Who wants to go first?
Okay. Esteemed President told me it sounds cosmic, so I need to take a stand here. I was in Ojai a couple of years ago and I was talking with one of the local residents. I mentioned Ojai, California, in terms of Annie Besant's work and the Krishnamurti Foundation School, the Besant School, where these, I won't say remnants, but living testimony to the past importance of Ojai exists. And I was talking to this resident of Ojai and he said, of course, the New Age started here. It started in Ojai. You go down the local park, you have a bust of Annie Besant, Krishnamurti, a little bit about them. It started here because it opened up potentiality for thinking. And we are a very cosmopolitan group here, and we are very proud of our achievement in our the arts and culture and moving forward. So obviously this gentleman, the New Age started there, and it was breaking out of the traditional mould. And he said especially the arts beyond education, culture and the arts, which reflects Annie Besant's vision, if you like. These were terribly important in preserving and continuing civilization so it doesn't become a technological structure in which we have to live. So that's just one point. The second point I'd like to make is that in the 60s, you have the sort of a movement, the open, the free love, the flower power people, which was also important in breaking down in the West traditional views. And to me, that sort of opened up the way for a more maybe sophisticated New Age movement, because it was also moving towards the East. George Harrison, the Beatles had their swamis, yeah. So there was an opening up. I'm going back further to say than perhaps in the 60s and the 70s, and many of us can remember that. Peace, brother and sister. Thank you. And so gradually this transition came that we know in the Eastern philosophy there is in the Brahma Kumaris, for example, the Golden Age and the Kali Yuga and the evolution you live in that tradition. So I'll just kick it off with those ideas and someone else can take over.
Thank you.
I think the definition of New Age would be slightly different from a theosophical angle than from what a common man would talk about as New Age. To the common man, a New Age is the age of technology, of internet, of automation, of the change in the culture and all that. For a theosophist, our teachings have not changed with the internet, although the means of giving them might change, but the teachings are still the same. Our basic fundamentals are still the same. So, I think the time frame of New Age for theosophists is much longer. And as Dorothy very rightly said, that the New Age started when Theosophy was founded.
Thank you. Does the President have anything to add? This is for the people on the panel, this question. the panel members here are answering the questions today, but thank you.
Just briefly, at least in the Western world, the term New Age really tends to talk about the spiritual movement that has its roots really in the founding of the Theosophical Society, but it's just components of that have been taken and have been explored and developed, so that there is this kind of there's this community of views related to that which is spiritual. But all of it, the difficulties with it is that much of it is not grounded in a deeper context. So it can be a little bit flighty seeming at times. But the basic idea, the sense is that we're on the cusp of moving into some deeper appreciation of the nature of self and the universe.
Thank you. The next question relates to the theme of this convention to a certain extent. The question is, how does one travel from self-centeredness to altruism? How does one travel, how does one move from self-centeredness to altruism? Who would like to go first? I'm the facilitator, yes?
Probably for that, there's a lot of things that can be said, and obviously during the course of our convention there are a lot of things that have been said. But how do you go there? A lot of it is conditioned by our own personalities and temperaments, I think. For some it might be more appealing to go a particular way, for some another. I would refer people who want to know how you do that to Barbara Adyar, to Jim Colbert, to Pedro Oliveira, to all of the various people who have commented on that during our time together. Ultimately, it's something that requires, in the words of Blavatsky, one of the things that is a requirement to deepen, a requirement in order to move from this self-centeredness to some state we could call altruism. It requires something that most of us don't want to do. And so in a way, you really don't want to keep repeating it. But the idea that she puts forward is that in order to have any sort of sense, any sort of openness to this deeper aspect of our being, we have to first become aware. And she says, profoundly aware of the unvarying state of our own profound ignorance, that from moment to moment we delude ourselves. Who wants to do that work? Some of us have been fortunate enough that you have at least momentary breakthroughs where the clouds part and you actually have some sort of vision of something that is more abiding and real. But then the work begins. The vision is momentary. But then the work of perfecting or purifying, another word that we largely misunderstand, of purifying those things which block this perception, then it begins. And it begins with the profound awareness that from moment to moment we are ignorant. In the absence of ignorance, there is altruism.
Thank you. Dorothy?
Okay, thank you. I'd like to start at the beginning and talk about initially the motivation and the will to search, to actually face that question, probably in moments of crisis or a huge crisis, and I think Dr. Timney indicated that in The Secret of Self-Realization, that it's in times of crisis that when one's conditioning, and Krishnamurti might appreciate this too, times when one's conditioning no longer supports one moving forward, when everything has been taken away and you are forced not to to keep following or keep expecting answers on a silver platter, that in fact you start yourself to ask some of those key questions that can keep you going. And just referring back to the New Age movement, in the 80s and the 90s in Melbourne, Australia, there was a plethora of bookshops opened and new readings, all sorts of readings, from channelings from extraterrestrials, from Raymond Moody's Life After Life. There was a lot of literature around that opened up people's thinking, opened up them to more questions. And this, in fact, having traversed that decade, those 2 decades, and someone said it's when you find that the New Age activities no longer don't give you that depth. If your need to know about yourself and why you're on this planet is strong enough, it will carry you through the journey. And you may go from teachings to insight, from insight to building a vision, from a vision, the hard work, the steep and thorny road. And from that, I think you can move from the fragmentation. We don't know we're fragmented. From fragmentation to wholeness. So having an overview of where we're going and having a vision, having a purpose which is open-ended, I want to know. I think when I first read that strange little book, Jonathan Livingston Seagull. Anyone read that book way back in the... Yeah. I can remember that, I can still see the day I read that, and I just shouted to the universe and I said, I want to know. And that night at a dinner with friends, they said, well, what did you want to know? And I said, I wanted to know what there was to know. I felt I knew nothing. That was the effect of that book. So, it's a journey that comes from within, maybe an impulse of the soul, maybe you need to be find that your conditioning no longer supports you, but that motivation and intention is very strong to find out.
Thank you. Brother Pradeep?
I think the other two speakers have elaborated this, I think, almost to perfection as far as the deeper meaning of this is concerned. But let me tell you superficially what it can be. How do I travel from self-centeredness to altruism? And I think one way is by service, because when you serve others, you feel that happiness. And then you'll realize why you felt happy, and that will move you towards altruism. The next is meditation. We all know that. It's in meditation that we realize some of these things, and it is through meditation there is another path towards altruism. And finally, of course, study. When we study the things, we study the books, I think that will be another path. So these are the 3 shallower paths of the question, the answers. It's a shallower answer, but I think the deeper answer has been very well narrated by the other 2 speakers.
Thank you. Perhaps in a sense it begins with examining ourselves where we are right now, and then perhaps consciously modifying that trajectory somewhat if we think it's necessary. Next question. I wonder why there was no mention of EST, Esoteric School of Theosophy, even once during the panel discussion in improving quality of membership, because as understood, ES is the heart of the TS. Kindly explain.
Just briefly, I think probably this is a question that should be passed to Linda, even though she claims moderator. I think she's going to have to speak this time. So I'm going to give it to you, Linda.
Okay, ditto.
Well, I don't know why there was no mention of the Esoteric School of Theosophy on the panel concerned. But perhaps I might take the liberty of saying just a little bit about the ES, because when the International President's Letter of Welcome is sent to every single new member of the TS, there's a little postscript at the end about the esoteric school. It was originally founded as the esoteric section of the TS by Madame Blavatsky, so it was actually a section of the Theosophical Society. It later became known as the Eastern School, and later again as the Esoteric School of Theosophy. It's constitutionally separate from the Theosophical Society. However, there's a very real relationship between the ES, as it's often called, and the TS. In that, first of all, members of the ES are required to have 2 years of active membership of the TS before they can join. So you need to be a TS member in order to belong to the esoteric school. And just briefly, it's based around Raja Yoga, and for those who are interested, it is one way of making Theosophy a living flame, if you like, in one's life. It's one option chosen by some people. It requires a few basic aspects of life to be adopted, for example, vegetarianism, non-smoking, non-taking of alcohol and non-medicinal drugs. If one is in a relationship, a loving and committed relationship, that sort of thing, and a few simple disciplines. So it seemed a good idea to perhaps say a little bit about it. The ES is not a secret body, it is a private body, constitutionally separate from the TS, but nevertheless I think the ES has helped to give the Theosophical Society itself a great deal of vitality over many, many decades. The comment made in the question was, as understood, the ES is the heart of the TS. I think it's fair to say that, as I mentioned, much vitality is infused through the ES into the TS. The ES does not control the TS, though, for example, and I would also add that that heart of the TS, I would extend that to any and all committed members of the TS who are working for the Theosophical Society in a spirit of altruism. Perhaps that's a bit longer than I might have taken, but it seemed an opportunity. Now I have a question for our President specifically. Can you describe a master in your personal understanding?
I have said that I need to learn to give more pithy answers, short and to the point. So I would say, in answer to this question, no.
That was the pithiest answer I can remember in recent TS history. Okay, we will proceed. Next question. Does Hinduism contribute to the philosophy of Theosophy? Does Hinduism contribute to the philosophy of Theosophy? Brother Pradeep?
Well, my answer is definitely yes. In fact, a lot of Theosophy has been based on Hinduism. But I think it has been washed off a certain undesirable elements that had got into Hinduism. But there is no doubt about the fact that from what we have read and from what our founders have spoken, from what Annie Besant had studied after coming to India, the religion like Hinduism and Buddhism, and from what we have seen as a practice in Theosophy, there is no doubt in my mind that it is definitely based on Hinduism. Even if you will see some of the basic characteristics, Theosophy tells us to be tolerant. And I think Hinduism is probably one of the most tolerant religions. So, it's not just from the words that are written, but even in the practice, you will find that yes, certainly it is not purely based on Hinduism, but largely based on Hinduism and Buddhism, I should say.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I think I'd like to comment on the esoteric aspect of that question, and just say that, of course, I was not born in the Hindu tradition, but in the Christian tradition. But now it is interesting that through a few years of studying and learning and trying to work and live some aspects of it in order to explore, open up more things that I don't know about the world and philosophy and religion, what has happened to me is that it's made me turn around to take a look and start to look at esoteric Christianity, and to go back and look at Christ's teachings, for example, and see the essence of those teachings, the oneness that was seen in his teachings, and to acknowledge that, yes, Theosophy in a sense, the world religions have Theosophy in all their aspects, not all their aspects, but Theosophy is in each religion. So it was a philosophy perhaps that came into the world, and I think Annie Besant made a comment about this, that it was the first time that it was open to the public in a way. It didn't have compulsory teachings that you had to adopt, but in fact it could be the thing that can, perhaps the glue that can galvanise religions in a sense. And one can look at the Parliament of the World Religions, for example, and taking a look at their, dare I say it, vision and mission statements, to see how far that organisation is coming along to open up and look at their similarities in terms of the key concepts of the philosophy, if you like, of being and who we are. So I have a lot of hope that we don't become segregated as another religion, but rather we combine with other religions, in a sense, the ideas of them, not the religions themselves, but the ideas within them, to break down any barriers that may exist.
All right. The second question on this page is, if Theosophy is the cornerstone of future religion, what is the position of other religions? If I remember correctly, it was originally that Theosophy was intended as the cornerstone as the future religions of humanity. So the question is, what is the position of other religions, therefore? Who wants to go first?
Could I just
Dorothy?
continue? Thanks, Linda. I think I jumped the question there. But it was said in the Mahachohan's letter that was supposed to be Theosophy, the cornerstone of future religions. And that letter is rather a controversial one, I'm sure. But when the society was first begun, some of the extracts from the Mahatma Kutumi, for example, looking at Western civilization and commenting that for all its fine achievements, intellectual achievements, he used these words: "Ye are still barbarians," in terms of, he went on to say, in terms of the decrease in spirituality. So I think he was, from his view, attempting to infuse Theosophy as into all religions, was behind that, and that was the aim. And so you have progressive societies being perhaps disappearing, coming and going, theosophical societies, And at the heart of it, the cause of these things was the grouping into intellectuality and to actually lose the sense and the feel of that cohesion of the ideas that Theosophy presents, the living truth of it, rather than the intellectuality. I just make that point again. The living truth. It's as if perhaps sometimes we're in danger of over-quoting HPB and we're chewing over her work and chewing over her work. We must acknowledge, I think, that she, the teachings, the Mahatmas, brought people out of the churches, if you like, in the West, seeking a new way, seeking a new truth, perhaps. And perhaps now it is time for us to face the question, how do we bring people into the teachings themselves?
Thank you, Dorothy.
Yeah, sorry.
I wonder if another way of phrasing this question is, do other religions have a role if Theosophy is the cornerstone of the future religions of humanity? I wonder if that is sort of the intent of this question. Do our other panellists have any comment on this? No?
Well, I believe that the understanding was not that Theosophy would become the future religion of humanity, but that the underpinnings of this of Theosophy would be what the future of humanity would be moving toward, the idea that there is a oneness that is universal, the idea that every single human expression that strives towards truth are in one sense all under the same overshadowing influence of this Theosophy. And the idea that within each and every person there are these latent abilities, latent powers, and that the higher ones of those are the ones connected to the heart. The ability to be compassionate, to project love, to be selfless. Those would be the cornerstones upon which the religions of the future would rise. And I think the position of other religions, obviously I have not heard any other religionists saying that no, Theosophy is the religion of the future, but the principles that undergird all religions, I think, are the ones that were spoken of.
Thank you.
Yet I don't want to divert the questioning process, but I think I was a little bit too flip in answering the question about the Mahatma. I honestly, when I said that, I felt like something shifted. So I wanted to just get the exact question again. Describe a master in your personal understanding. What I was speaking to with my little off-the-cuff, inappropriate answer, honestly, in saying no. Obviously, anyone who has had the experience of perhaps even being in Adyar, of being still, and of feeling some sort of perhaps undescribable, unnameable presence arising within your heart. There's an experience, you could say that this is an understanding of what the master might mean. I find myself in a position as president of an organization that was founded for the work of the masters, that I think to some degree, anyone who steps into that position, there is some sort of association that necessarily takes place. It may not perhaps be the sort of thing that was the experience of H.P. Blavatsky. Obviously, it's not that. I mean, hers was a continuous dialogue with the masters of the wisdom. Alcott was the occasional, even physical glimpse of the masters of the wisdom, but he was no Blavatsky. But the underpinning is this sense that comes up very often. I'm going to tell you this. Adyar, many of you have been associated with this place for a long time, and you know that there's a certain presence and energy here. It's something that, as with all things, has its cycles of expression, largely dependent on us. This place has the potential to express the nature of these masters of the wisdom in ways that are perhaps unique on this planet. There's a history, there's a presence, there's a magnetism. What it really depends on is a certain awakening that has to take place with us, not as individuals, but together. My sense is this, that the purpose, the function, and the radiant energy of this place is something that is rising. I think perhaps some of you also feel that same thing. It's rising. And it's going to have its influence. The problem with such things is always that they require a certain change. In order for life to come out of a seed, the husk has to break. And the life that comes forth doesn't even resemble the seed that it comes out of. This is where we find ourselves. We can choose to cooperate with this. And the way we cooperate, the point of this whole gathering here together, from teachings to insight, the altruistic heart, the point of us coming together is to provide the opportunity for this life to make itself known, for us to be reminded that the one and only requirement for it to come fully alive within us is to allow for it. There are many ways we use our will. The highest way to use our will is to allow that which is to express through us, not to command, not to manipulate. And so, in terms of the understanding of the master, it's a subject that in theosophical history has been abused. And so, in a way, my little flip answer was to prevent this idea of personalizing someone's experience. That's a road we don't want to go down. But what we do want to do is, in your own life, in your own groups, to allow for that which is trying to make its presence known in this time to have its way with you. It's a possibility. And then we can talk really about an understanding of what the master might be. Because it's not an individual experience. The whole point of that is to express through humanity. And I can tell you this. There are moments that occur during the course of our times together where there is a focus, where there is a harmony. I don't need to tell you when those moments occur. Because when they do, the hallmark of it is that for some reason you feel that some type of expansion has taken place, that something is present among us, doesn't need to be described. And this is the work that we do in the world, because we provide an opening for, you choose what you want to call it. If the master works for you, call it the master. But we provide an opening for that to move into this world that is required. So that's our work. That's also why I say, sometimes maybe I need to give shorter answers, but that one I felt a door close when I said it. So I'm sorry for subverting the question process.
Thank you. Next question. We have time probably for 2 or 3 more questions. We will see how we go. As most of us live in democratic societies and organisations only consider changing their actions and motives if there is disapproval, does the TS ever show their disapproval or disappointment or opinion of the actions taken by groups who seem to have no morals, ethics, or ever think of the greater good? I'll just repeat that because it was a bit long. As most of us live in democratic societies and organisations only consider changing their actions and motives if there is disapproval, does the TS ever show disapproval or disappointment, etc., of actions taken by groups who seem to have no morals, ethics, or think of the greater good. So I guess, does the TS as an institution express disapproval for organisations or societies which seem to have no morals or ethics or think of the greater good? Dorothy?
Yes, I'll kick it off, Linda, by saying, pardon me, that as an organisation, the TS does not make judgments on other organisations or groups. Rather, I think HPB made that very clear, what the role was. But if individuals wish to join groups or wish to make comments in their own right, that is the right of in a democratic society.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Well, I think the TS does not make any focused or particular comments about any other religions or organizations. However, in preaching the principles that are near and dear to TS, it does make it very clear that what some organizations are doing, like bloodshed, like lack of tolerance, like some kind of self-centeredness. I think the teachings of Theosophy probably show the disapproval, but that is not verbally said by the Theosophical Society.
Just one thing, the Theosophical Society as an organization does not take those sorts of disapproving stands. I, though, come from the United States, where I have an example of Joy Mills, who many of you knew, and she was president of the Theosophical Society during the height of what was then the Civil Rights Movement. So in the United States, what that meant was that a whole group of people were denied rights, citizens of the country denied rights by virtue of the color of their skin. As president of the Theosophical Society, she did not commit the Theosophical Society to any movement within the Civil Rights Movement. What she did do was to speak in no uncertain terms that this is something that is categorically wrong, that the sorts of violence, the abusive behaviors that we see in the world are wrong. They are inhuman, and they are not in keeping with the way that we are meant to live with one another. So that's a fact. But as a Theosophical Society, that's not the position, because obviously a Theosophical Society in any country would cease to exist if it was to come into conflict with the governing bodies in any of our countries, because it's a difficult business being in politics.
I think as a footnote to these comments, of course, Dr. Annie Besant founded the Theosophical Order of Service in 1908, which does wonderful work in different countries, and which can certainly get involved in these kinds of issues, in specific grassroots issues, taking action and so forth. And I would certainly urge members who are interested in this kind of practical application of Theosophy to consider becoming involved in the Theosophical Order of Service as well. All right. Next question. How do we set an example in the world if we aren't known and we don't express our opinion? This is making a set of assumptions here. How do we set an example in the world if we aren't known and we don't express our opinion? Anybody? Is it true that we are not known? Dorothy?
Yes, I'll just maybe go back to Dr. Annie Besant on this one, go back to Annie Besant on this. And she said, be the example, just be the living example yourself. And that is the main thing. Don't take any notice of a man's words, don't take any notice of this or that, but how they are to one another. So that means we are living examples. We are making a statement. We're making a statement, but that doesn't exclude us from making comments in groups that are talking about human issues. You can give a point of view to contribute to what is represented in different maybe philosophies and religions and what's expected, look at the different teachings, where they come from, without saying, this is what the TS believes and I'm a member of that and this is how it is.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Well, very briefly, I think I would like to just make a slight distinction. The question says, how do we set an example in the world if we are not known or if we don't express an opinion? Now, I'll answer to the first part. I do believe that we should try and be known in the world to the extent that anything that we are doing is to help people know that such a thing as Theosophy exists. It should not be publicity, it should not be advertisement. However, it can be public relations. And what is the definition of public relations? Well, public relations is to appropriately let others know about the good work that you are doing. That's all. That's public relations. And I think that is something probably that Theosophical Society needs to do a little more of, so that we become better known, so that people know that such a thing as Theosophy exists.
Thank you. Anything from you? Okay. All right. This is a slightly long one. The objects of the TS are very clear both in words and meaning. We take these objects as mantras in the Theosophical Society. This submission is specifically concerned with the third object and in connection with using the last word, man, to investigate unexplained laws of nature and powers latent in man. Different words are used in print, such as man, humankind, humanity, and human being. The submission is, can we not use the same word for all purposes, although the above words carry nearly the same meaning? So this person is asking, in the context of the third object, if one word can be used, I guess, throughout, in all places, in relation to the third object. Would you mind if I say something about the one in Australia, because I was involved in this? In the Australian section at one stage, we were keen to see if it was possible to preserve the intent of the objects and provide some kind of gender-neutral alternative. When we did a survey in the Australian section to try to replace the word brotherhood, we had so many different views. There was no consistency. It was not possible to even come up with anything in particular. But the most common response in relation to the third object resulted in, with the permission of the General Council at that time, the third object in the Australian section being changed to the word the human being, so powers latent in the human being. That's how that came about. I don't know about the other ones. Anyway, would our President like to comment on that, or Dorothy has something?
Well, I did suggest cosmic cosmic kinship the other night, or universal kinship. It may be a good starting point as we expand our vision into the 21st century, and just be aware that we have that language in fact does condition cultural meaning, and it has done for many, many years, and perhaps going back to the patriarchal church. So just having said that, there is a tradition in cultures that language enforces particular values. So that's why I opted for something like universal kinship or cosmic kinship, because that's where we are now. We are really embracing something broader than this little planet. So it appealed to me to use that word.
This is a very big subject, actually.
I think to some degree we talked about this last year during the panel. At that point we just addressed the idea of the language of brotherhood as an expression of universal kinship, or whatever the difficulty has been that the phrasing is, you want to be as clear as possible. You also don't want to vary from what has been the initial intent, but you also have to recognize that during the course of time, ways of expressing even change. I mean, the language that is used takes on new meanings. So that's always something that you just have to have in the back of your mind. I do know that these same objects are translated into all of the languages of the world, and depending on the language, the word for man is gender neutral. It's man, woman is the same word. In English, we don't have that. So we are faced with the realization that to some people it is, it's almost offensive to say that it's about a brotherhood. I've had people ask me, now your organization, it's the Universal Brotherhood. That's right. So if it was sisterhood, would that be something that you would ascribe to? And so, it gets a little bit challenging when you get to that point.
Yeah, I think I'll probably relate this to what an organization called Rotary went through. Rotary was a male-dominated organization, and ladies could not be members. We are fortunate that one of our founders was a lady, and so that was not so. But in Rotary, everywhere they had the word man. And when the Supreme Court in the US ruled that this is unconstitutional, finally Rotary woke up way down sometime, I believe in June of 1989, and started accepting ladies. And at that time, a constitutional change was made in which everywhere where there was the word man, they said or women. However, if we translate this in my state language, Gujarati, it is not a problem at all, because in Gujarati, we say manas, and manas is either men or women. So as far as a Gujarati translation is concerned, there is no problem at all. But yes, the problem does come up when we talk of man. But now, as I think Tim has rightly said, man includes women. And we all know that as such also, man cannot be without women.
Thank you. There's one question that I'd like to end with, which may in a way be linked a little bit to the theme of this convention. It's a question asking how we at the village level can spread or explain Theosophy to innocent people. It's a rather lovely question. At the village level, how can one spread or explain Theosophy to innocent people? I am reminded of an introduction to our president the other day when it was mentioned that he has a certain way of being able to explain certain concepts, theosophical concepts, in everyday language. So, who would like to answer this?
Oh, I passed that.
No? Dorothy?
It falls to me. Uh, in Buddhism, one of the central figures of study relates to an exceedingly complex and profound set of ideas. H.P. Blavatsky spent time talking about these 12 nidanas, or the 12 interdependent links that lead to birth, life, consciousness, all of those, exceedingly complex, potentially. But there is a diagram. It's really just a picture form called the Bhava Chakra. And it pre-existed Buddhism. But it's these pictures. It starts off with an old woman on the cane. And, that symbolizes ignorance. Then you have something there where there's a monkey climbing in a tree, and it signifies human consciousness. And it goes on. So they're like these 12 images, which with no education, with no particular study, these things were put before people and then were elaborated upon. So the images stick, even if the particular wording does not. So that's just one way. I know when I was very young in the Theosophical Society, we had, at one point, we decided we were just going to go on a vacation. It was a group of us. And we were all fairly tall. And we went down to Mexico, and every place we stopped, they would ask if we were a basketball team. Because one of them was 6'6", Doug's height. And so finally we stopped one place, we said, yeah, we're a basketball team. Because they had these basketball courts. They said, well, what's the name of your team? And one person said, we're the Theosophias. And they said, oh, here's a ball. And we went out to the court, and it turns out that the rims, they're normally 10 feet high. For whatever reason, they were 8 feet high in Mexico. And I used to play basketball. So I saw that, and I became like a dream team star. Everything looked wonderful. But people would gather around after they saw this fantastic American basketball team play, and we'd talk to them about Theosophy. And so, word of that got back to the American section. So that was sports. Later on, there was a group of people who gathered around who were musicians. All of them felt something in their music, and they wanted to have some sort of deepening focus. So they would come, we would talk, they would play their music, and that developed into a musical expression of Theosophy. We make a mistake in thinking that the passive form that we tend to use, which is talking to people while they sit and listen, is the only approach. So we can become more creative with this. Theosophy is everything. Everything's not Theosophy. But we have to allow ourselves to experiment, and we have to allow ourselves to make mistakes. We have to allow ourselves to fail, but we cannot allow ourselves to stop trying.
Thank you. I think that's a very good note to finish on, an inspiring note. So I'd like to thank, on behalf of you, our panellists, Dorothy Bell, educationist and TS International Lecturer from Australia, our President Tim Boyd, and General Secretary of the Indian Section, Brother Pradeep Gohil. This session is now closed.